Très bien.
Grande. Congratulations. Really going.
Hello.
Sylvia
Okay, then
Hottinger, puedes
yeah,
saludar.
use a headset there.
Okay, here's a copy
Ah, the copy
of
of
the
the
tape.
PowerPoint.
Thank you. Is it your headset? C'est à vous qui parle. Non, je m'assois là. Il n'y a pas de problème.
No problem. We're going to wait a few minutes. People are coming. Bonjour, good morning, buenos dias. We're going to start with our first panel of the day, of a panel that is very important to us because we are going to discuss topics that are extremely important in our society today, but also among the studies of Freemasonry that are evolving these days, and something that we need to consider. And we are going to change the order of the program. We're going to start with Françoise Moreillon because she's going to go and get the award for service for the service for the female lodge and the work that they have do here in Paris and also to Freemasonry in general. So we are going to change the order. And Françoise Moreillon, after a professional career in special education, divides her time between her family and Freemasonry. Initiated in the Cosmos Lodge in 1963, she quickly became interested in the history of Freemasonry, especially Féminine. She has been a member of the Commission nationale d'histoire et de recherche maçonnique de la Grande Loge Féminine de France for more than 25 years and was its president in 2016 and 2017. Her research is on the history of female Freemasonry, the great figures, particularly feminine, who marked its development, adoption lodges of the 18th century and the 20th century, and the rite of adoption and the study of rituals. Without further ado, Françoise Moreillon, s'il vous plaît. Merci.
Bonjour à tous et à toutes. Good morning. Donc, je vais vous parler du passage du rite d'adoption au rite écossais à la Grande Loge féminine de France. C'est par un vote du convent de septembre 1958 que la Grande Loge féminine de France décide que le rite écossais ancien et accepté remplacera désormais le rite d'adoption, ce rite spécifique pratiqué par les femmes depuis le XVIIIe siècle. Comment cette décision fut-elle mise en œuvre et à la suite de quelles réflexions ? Ces questions sont au cœur de ma communication. Notre obédience exclusivement féminine, indépendante et souveraine a été constituée le 21 octobre 1945 sous le nom d'Union maçonnique féminine de France. La franc-maçonnerie féminine est cependant apparue dès le XVIIIe siècle et elle a fait son chemin sous la forme de loge d'adoption jusqu'à sa totale souveraineté instaurée au sortir de la Deuxième Guerre mondiale. Grâce au dépouillement des archives russes de la Grande Loge de France, il a été possible d'accéder à ce que fut, durant la première moitié du XXe siècle, la vie des loges d'adoption dans cette obédience qui pratique le rite écossais ancien et accepté. La décision de se tourner vers ce rite en 1958 n'est sans doute pas le fruit du hasard. En étudiant l'implantation et le fonctionnement des loges d'adoption du XVIIIe siècle, il est également permis de se demander si le côte-à-côte de la franc-maçonnerie féminine et des loges écossaises n'a pas commencé dès les premiers temps, bien avant la formalisation de ce rite en 33 degrés. Que savons-nous en effet de la proximité de la franc-maçonnerie féminine avec l'écossisme du XVIIIe siècle et même avec le Suprême Conseil de France du XIXe siècle ? Peu de choses. Donc, mais on peut cependant trouver quelques traces qui méritent réflexion. Les loges d'adoption sont reconnues le 10 juin 1774 par le tout jeune Grand Orient. Elles existent antérieurement, probablement depuis les années 1740. On peut donc parallèlement faire l'hypothèse d'un lien avec la première Grande Loge, avec les mères loges n'ayant pas rallié le Grand Orient et avec l'écossisme du XVIIIe siècle. Chacun sait que le mot écossisme désigne la maçonnerie de haut grade de cette époque et ne fait pas référence au rite écossais décliné en 33 grades qui fut instauré plus tard. Des diplômes de maîtresse tant à la... Ah, ça marche. Ah, ça n'avance pas. Les diplômes de maîtresse, tant à la Bibliothèque nationale de France que dans d'autres musées maçonniques, sont signés de frères chevaliers Rose-Croix et de chevaliers Cadoche. Des tableaux de loge, des tableaux de la loge de la Candeur à Paris, de la Concorde à Dijon, de la Sincérité à Besançon, montrent que les hauts grades destinés aux femmes portent des noms tels que parfaite maçonne, écossaise, sublime écossaise, qui sont des noms très proches de ceux des frères. La princesse de Lamballe, elle-même, porte le titre de grande maîtresse des loges écossaises féminines régulières de France, titre qu'elle a reçu le 26 février 1781 dans la mère loge écossaise d'adoption, le contrat social dont elle est la grande maîtresse particulière. Voilà, citons aussi un extrait éloquent du discours que prononça la marquise de Villette lors de la création de la loge d'adoption Belle et Bonne à Paris en 1819. Nous serons secondés dans toutes nos vues bienfaisantes par la coopération et l'appui du grand commandeur titulaire du Rite Écossais, qui a regardé comme une continuation de ses importantes fonctions la direction des travaux de nos vénérables ateliers. Cette loge d'adoption était celle d'une loge de la Grande Loge écossaise, elle-même sous le gouvernement du Suprême Conseil. Donc, la création des loges d'adoption au sein de la Grande Loge de France, d'abord par la loge Le Libre Examen en 1901, puis par l'Obédience elle-même en 1907, s'inscrit dans cette continuité. Allons jusqu'en 1945 et nous reviendrons ensuite sur le tournant du XXe siècle. Dès sa création en 1945, donc, l'Union maçonnique féminine de France, c'est le nom de notre obédience à ses débuts, pose question aux autres obédiences. Un courrier du Grand Orient adressé à la grande maîtresse lui fait la demande suivante. « Je serais heureux de connaître le fonctionnement de votre obédience, son titre exact, son siège social, son caractère de société déclarée s'il y a lieu, son rite et aussi si le symbole du grand architecte de l'univers est facultatif ou obligatoire. » Le 22 avril 1946, Germain Réal, nom de plume de Suzanne Barrier, grande secrétaire de l'Union maçonnique féminine de France, lui répond, et pour ce qui concerne le rite pratiqué, elle écrit « Depuis que la Grande Loge de France a donné l'autonomie aux sœurs des loges d'adoption, nous nous sommes regroupés sous le nom d'Union maçonnique féminine de France. Nous avons conservé l'initiation qui nous a été donnée lorsque nous étions loge d'adoption et qui est une initiation essentiellement féminine. Et continuons à travailler au rite écossais ancien et accepté. Nos loges ouvrent leurs travaux à la gloire du grand architecte de l'univers. Elles sont essentiellement féminines, mais peuvent recevoir des frères en tenue blanche fermée sur invitation. » Cette réponse, on le voit, vient confirmer la déclaration faite par le grand maître de la Grande Loge de France, Michel Duménil de Gramont, au moment du vote de l'abrogation de la Constitution et des règlements généraux des loges d'adoption par le convent de la Grande Loge de France en septembre 1945. Il dit « Nos sœurs nous ont assuré qu'elles se considéraient comme étant toujours sous le patronage de la Grande Loge de France et que leur activité s'inspirerait constamment des principes de la maçonnerie écossaise. Le lien de la Grande Loge de France est dénoué, certes, l'indépendance est proclamée, mais l'attachement aux principes de la maçonnerie écossaise demeure et paraît bien normal après plus de 40 ans de cohabitation. » Alors, pour mieux le comprendre, il me semble utile de revenir sur la situation qui est celle des francs-maçonnes au tournant du XXe siècle. Depuis 1893, les femmes peuvent entrer dans une loge du droit humain, obédience mixte créée par Maria de Rem et Georges Martin. Depuis 1901, elles peuvent aussi choisir d'entrer dans une loge de la Grande Loge symbolique écossaise mixte et maintenue, et obédience ultra-démocratique dont la vie éphémère fut capitale pour les femmes. De mars 1901 à avril 1903, elles ont la possibilité d'être reçues maçonnes dans la loge d'adoption du libre examen à la Grande Loge de France. Loge ouverte à l'initiative et sous la seule responsabilité de la loge masculine, qui, malgré la demande officielle, n'obtient l'aval ni du Suprême Conseil ni de la Grande Loge de France, ce qui conduit à la mise en sommeil de la loge d'adoption. En juillet 1906, les hommes de la Grande Loge mixte, la Nouvelle-Jérusalem numéro 5 de la Grande Loge symbolique écossaise mixte et maintenue, intègrent la Grande Loge de France sous le numéro 376. Afin que les femmes de la loge ne soient pas écartées de la franc-maçonnerie, André Lévy-Houlman, le vénérable maître, obtient pour elle, de la Grande Loge de France, l'autorisation de constituer une loge d'adoption. il a, le 4 décembre 1906, donné pour convaincre les frères une conférence intitulée « De l'entrée des femmes dans la maçonnerie d'adoption écossaise », et les femmes de la loge qui ne souhaitent pas rejoindre une loge mixte se sont posées en loge la question de la qualité des loges du XVIIIe siècle et de l'intérêt de leur philosophie pour elles en ce début du XXe siècle. 11 d'entre elles adhèrent au projet d'entrer dans une loge d'adoption. La loge féminine est installée le 31 mai 1907 sous le numéro 376 bis. Blanche Muratet, membre du droit humain, initiée au rite d'adoption en Espagne, déjà grande maîtresse du libre examen en 1903, est la première grande maîtresse de cette loge d'adoption. La loge féminine est placée sous l'égide de la Grande Loge de France, sous la responsabilité de la loge masculine. Elle porte le même numéro, suivi de bis. Entre 1901 et 1940, il y eut ainsi 11 créations de loges d'adoption à la Grande Loge de France, 3 en province, les autres à Paris, plus de 300 femmes initiées. La Grande Loge de France, créée en 1894, de même que la Grande Loge symbolique écossaise, créée en 1880, sont des émanations du Suprême Conseil de France. Ces deux obédiences sont toutes deux fidèles au rite écossais ancien et accepté. Les loges d'adoption de la Grande Loge de France sont administrées conformément aux règlements généraux de cette obédience. Tous leurs documents officiels, par conséquent, portent la mention rite écossais ancien et accepté, et les cordons bleus des officières d'adoption en vigueur au siècle précédent sont à la demande du Conseil fédéral bordés du rouge de l'écossais. Certes, les sœurs demandent, sans jamais renoncer, des papiers maçonniques spécifiques aux loges d'adoption, un cabinet de réflexion qui leur soit propre. Elles s'imprègnent de leur rite, elles en conservent, amplifient et transmettent la spécificité. Mais si le fonds initiatique reçoit toute leur adhésion, ils ne s'en teintent pas moins d'écossisme par capillarité, on pourrait dire, par proximité, due au simple fait d'être sous l'égide du rite écossais ancien et accepté dans une obédience travaillant à ce rite. Après les sautoirs, l'apparition des 2 colonnes sur les diplômes de maîtresse en est une autre preuve. À l'exemple de leurs frères, les maçonnes de la Grande Loge de France se réclament du rite écossais et l'habitude en est gardée après l'indépendance. Des diplômes d'adoption d'enfants, des patentes de loge en témoignent. Nous en avons à la Grande Loge féminine. Dès l'année maçonnique 1946-47, les loges réfléchissent à la question du symbolisme féminin dans la maçonnerie écossaise. C'est la sœur Lasbarer des loges Minerve et Théba qui en donne le rapport au congrès de 1947. En voici quelques éléments afin que vous sentiez leur questionnement et les objectifs qu'ils sous-tendent. Alors je raconte. Après avoir fait un tour d'horizon historique, les loges se demandent pourquoi, le travail ne différant pas entre une loge masculine et une loge féminine, le cérémonial symbolique et les signes de reconnaissance sont eux différents. Elles s'étonnent de ces différences, mais les francs-maçonnes de l'époque pensent pour la plupart qu'elles sont normales et qu'elles obéissent à la loi immuable du binaire. Les rituels différents mettent en œuvre la bipolarité primordiale de notre monde sensible, tout simplement. Elles se demandent alors comment aller plus loin dans l'initiation. Une proposition tendant à remplacer l'acclamation liberté, égalité, fraternité par sagesse, force, beauté est présentée au congrès de 1947. Le Conseil supérieur estime qu'il n'y a pas lieu de modifier une des bases communes de la maçonnerie universelle. La proposition est rejetée. Compléter les 3 premiers degrés par un 18e qui permettrait d'accéder au grade supérieur est une autre solution envisagée. Cette réalisation pense-t-elle ouvrir à la possibilité aux sœurs de constituer un collège des rites qui se chargerait de la direction initiatique de l'Union. Il aurait pour tâche de maintenir l'esprit maçonnique, de développer l'enseignement initiatique et symbolique et de veiller que l'Union ne s'écarte pas des traditions pures qui font la beauté de l'œuvre. Cette organisation calquée sur celle de l'écosisme permettrait de s'intégrer à la structure générale et extérieure de l'ordre, car en réalité, l'Union, l'obédience, est un rameau indépendant de la maçonnerie universelle, libre de modifier son statut intérieur et ses rites comme elle l'entend si les besoins de la nature profonde de ses membres le demandent, précise le rapport. Changer le titre pour un autre plus conforme au cadre initiatique L'idée va mûrir jusqu'en 1952, moment où l'Union maçonnique féminine de France deviendra Grande Loge féminine de France. Réviser les rituels, la suggestion va s'imposer à partir de 1957. Pour l'instant, une commission d'études pour la mise au point du 18e degré est désignée. Elle est composée de Germain Réal, Marie-Louise Trignol, Gisèle Fèvre et Françoise Lasbarrer. Et on commence par dire convent au lieu de congrès dès 1950. Mais les temps changent. Les femmes travaillent, font de plus en plus souvent les mêmes métiers que les hommes. Les nouvelles initiées comprennent de moins en moins le pourquoi de la différence avec les rituels des hommes. Elles rendent visite aux loges du droit humain, rencontrent des femmes qui pratiquent les mêmes rituels que les hommes. Le droit humain, pour sa part, ne reconnaît plus le rite d'adoption comme un rite régulièrement initiatique. Les sœurs qui demandent à le rejoindre sont réinitiées. Une réforme du rituel faciliterait les visites et les fréquentations interobédientielles. Les sœurs se mettent au travail et savent jouer de toutes les ambiguïtés dont je viens de vous parler et organiser la mise en place et la pratique du rite écossais qui devient ainsi, en 1958, le rite de la Grande Loge féminine de France. Un développement s'ensuit qui fait de la Grande Loge féminine la première obédience mondiale exclusivement féminine. Alors, comment les choses se sont-elles passées en pratique ? Pour le savoir, j'ai consulté les livres d'architecture des loges La Nouvelle-Jérusalem, Minerve et Isis et les procès-verbaux des conseils fédéraux entourant l'année 58. Dans la tenue de juin 1957, après avoir entendu le rapport de la tenue de Grande Loge, la loge La Nouvelle-Jérusalem donne son accord pour que soit proposée au prochain convent la création d'une commission d'études chargée de réformer le rituel, en prenant pour norme le rite écossais ancien et accepté. Première étape, inspectrice et dépositaire, qui sont des noms spécifiques du rite d'adoption, deviennent première et deuxième surveillante, éloquence devient oratrice. Malgré l'opposition d'un petit groupe de sœurs attachées au rite d'adoption, le convent de septembre 58 vote l'adoption des nouveaux rituels concoctés par la commission et décide de pratiquer désormais le rite écossais ancien et accepté, rite identique à celui des frères. Mais les sœurs conservent des traces de leur tradition première. D'abord dans les rituels d'initiation, parce qu'elles gardent les chaînes, et la phrase sur les pôles de l'humanité. Ensuite sur les cordons des conseillères fédérales, qui restent décorés de roses, et sur la bannière de la Grande Loge féminine de France, qui porte 5 roses et la date de 1901, date de création du libre examen, loge numéro 1. C'est ce que vous avez vu sur la première page du diaporama. La secrétaire administrative est alors chargée de mettre en tête du bulletin de novembre 58 le texte suivant. Le Conseil fédéral avise toutes les sœurs de l'obédience que préalablement aux tenues d'installation de chaque atelier, les vénérables maîtresses devront leur communiquer les signes, batteries et attouchements du nouveau rituel. La grande secrétaire devra écrire aux vénérables maîtresses pour les avertir qu'une tenue de comité est prévue avant l'installation de chaque atelier pour communication des signes. Elle doit les prévenir en même temps de ne faire dans leur atelier aucune tenue d'initiation aux divers degrés avant que le Conseil fédéral donne communication des nouveaux signes de ces grades. Les vénérables maîtresses sont convoquées en temps et en heure pour recevoir l'initiation qu'elles devront communiquer avant la tenue d'installation. Initiation reçue aussi par communication. Ainsi, le lundi 3 novembre 1958 a lieu une tenue extraordinaire qui rassemble les officières de tous les ateliers afin de leur communiquer les nouveaux mots, signes et attouchements et les modifications apportées au rituel d'ouverture et de fermeture des travaux du premier degré. Au cours de cette tenue, la grande oratrice donne des indications sur le symbolisme du tableau du premier degré, les pas et ordres des apprentis. Il est procédé ensuite à une instruction pratique des sœurs présentes qui renouvelle les modalités d'entrée dans le temple sous la direction de la maîtresse des cérémonies. L'âge, la batterie, l'attouchement sont à leur tour l'objet d'une communication et d'une instruction, et la grande maîtresse remet les rituels d'ouverture et de fermeture aux vénérables maîtresses. Coïncidence, l'idée de porter toute la même robe initiatique noire est décidée cette année-là aussi. À Minerve, les sœurs revêtent la robe le 11 novembre 1958 et Germaine Gosselin ne manque pas de leur faire apprécier sa coupe en forme de croix de Malte et de leur rappeler quelle somme de vertu et quelle pureté d'âme elle implique. Dans cette loge, les 3 points du rite écossais ancien et accepté remplacent les 5 points du rite d'adoption dès le procès-verbal du comité du 25 novembre 1958. Et l'installation du collège des officières se fait avec le nouveau rituel le même jour. Tout semble aller de soi dans une continuité étonnante, c'est ce qu'on voit dans les livres d'architecture. La grande maîtresse, en compagnie des 2 grandes maîtresses adjointes, rend visite au grand maître de la Grande Loge de France pour l'informer du changement. Il les invite à former un groupement paramaçonnique qu'il reconnaîtrait. Les sœurs lui demandent alors la rédaction écrite d'une proposition concrète. Et résolument, elle tourne les talons. À l'unanimité, le Conseil fédéral décide que les frères seront désormais reçus après l'ouverture des travaux et qu'ils sortiront avant la fermeture, et qu'il ne peut pas être question d'autonomie des loges sur ce point. Le 10 décembre 1958 a lieu la tenue extraordinaire en vue de transmettre solennellement le 2e degré, et puis il en est ensuite de même pour le 3e. Certaines réticences s'étant fait sentir, le texte suivant est adressé à toutes les vénérables maîtresses des loges. Alors je cite : « Chaque vénérable devra prévenir les sœurs de son atelier que toutes les sœurs de l'atelier devront avoir reçu communication des signes, mots et attouchements du nouveau rituel correspondant à leur grade avant la tenue de Grande Loge de juin. Le Conseil fédéral devra être avisé que le nécessaire a bien été fait. Cet avis devra être fait sous serment maçonnique. Passé le délai indiqué ci-dessus, toute sœur qui ne se sera pas conformée à cette discipline sera radiée par le Conseil fédéral. » Des tenues solennelles collectives sont organisées pour la communication du rituel d'initiation et pour la communication du rituel du 2e degré. De même, pour la communication du rituel du 3e degré, les maîtresses sont réunies. Un travail de synthèse sur la transformation du rituel à présenter lors de la tenue de Grande Loge est demandé par la grande maîtresse à la grande oratrice Anne-Marie Gentilly. C'est un livret bleu dont on a quelques exemplaires à la Grande Loge féminine. Finalement, la date limite pour la régularisation des sœurs est fixée au 1er novembre 1959. À Minerve, la première initiation avec le nouveau rituel a lieu le 24 février 1959. Et c'est Blanche Albert qui fait l'instruction en loge au début de chaque tenue, par exemple sur le delta, les colonnes. Le Conseil fédéral du 4 novembre 1959 décide que les nouvelles initiées donneront des impressions d'initiation dans le mois qui suit l'initiation, travail qui ne sera pas commenté. Un travail symbolique au 1er degré remplacera les impressions maçonniques en usage jusqu'à présent pour marquer la fin de l'apprentissage et pourra, lui, être commenté. Il sera imposé par l'atelier. On s'intègre dans le fonctionnement du rite écossais ancien et accepté. La période de transition s'achève. Le changement est consommé. Le rite écossais ancien et accepté est désormais le rite de l'obédience. Il est le seul pratiqué jusqu'en 1973. La première loge créée au rite écossais ancien et accepté est la loge Thémis numéro 10 à l'orient de Limoges, fondée le 6 mai 1961. Puis vient Estia, numéro 11, à l'orient de Clichy en octobre de la même année. Rosa Maris, numéro 12, allume ses feux à l'orient de Marseille en 1962. Lutèce, première loge étrangère, est créée à Genève en 1964. En juin 1972, les grades du 4e au 33e degré viennent compléter ces 3 premiers par la formation du Suprême Conseil féminin de France, dont le premier souverain grand commandeur est Gisèle Fèvre. 1945, 1952, 1958, 1972, 4 dates où les francs-maçons ont pris en main leur destin par des décisions importantes qu'elles renforcent encore dès l'année 1973 en ouvrant la porte au rite français, puis peu à peu à d'autres rites dans le respect de toutes les sensibilités, pour le plus grand rayonnement de la franc-maçonnerie en général et de la franc-maçonnerie féminine en particulier. Merci de votre attention.
Are there any questions?
Bonjour Françoise. Une petite question pratique concernant les rapports de la Grande Loge féminine de France avec la Grande Loge de France, qu'on sait un petit peu parfois difficile. Mais qu'en est-il exactement finalement, puisque la Grande Loge féminine de France est issue directement de la Grande Loge de France et que la Grande Loge de France ne reconnaît pas du tout on reconnaît, on va dire plutôt à demi-mot, l'initiation, enfin pas l'initiation, mais au moins la maçonnerie féminine d'une certaine façon, ce qui n'est pas le cas du reste des obédiences françaises. Merci.
Oui, je pense que les relations avec la Grande Loge de France sont de bonnes relations, puisque, bon, la seule chose qui ne nous est pas permise, c'est d'assister aux tenues des frères. Ils ne reçoivent aucune femme, mais nous participons à leur commission, que ce soit la commission du droit, la commission des droits du citoyen, comme la commission d'histoire. Et non, nous avons de bonnes relations. Et nous sommes reçus au convent maintenant. Et puis maintenant, il y a aussi un cérémonial pour la tenue funèbre. Enfin, on progresse.
Yes.
Bonjour, bonjour Françoise. Je vais être celle qui apporte un bémol à toute cette belle histoire de passation et de régularité du rite d'adoption au rite écossais ancien accepté. Tout part de la notion de rituel et de rite. Si le rituel d'adoption, qui a son histoire, nous n'y revenons pas, a aussi un rite d'adoption, c'est-à-dire est-ce qu'elle a un rituel et un rite d'adoption, comment peut-elle être intégrée dès le départ dans les textes, quand elle est la fille naturelle effectivement de la Grande Loge de France, peut-être être assimilée au rite écossais ancien et accepté. C'est bien, tu parlais de cette capillarité qui faisait qu'il y avait dans ses proximités et tout, quelque chose qui faisait qu'elle se sentait aussi du rite écossais ancien et accepté, mais cela est dû dès le départ à une confusion, parce qu'il n'y avait pas assimilation. Il y avait dans les textes déjà quelques erreurs de l'obédience Grande Loge de France en tant que telle, qui se trompait, qui assimilait le rite et l'obédience. Ce qui fait que dès nos règlements généraux de 1906, où nous sommes acceptés, il était des fois question du rite écossais ancien et accepté à la place de la mention Grande Loge de France. Donc on peut dire que de toute façon, cette méprise, cette confusion a toujours existé. Bon, et donc c'était dans les règlements généraux des loges d'adoption de la Grande Loge de France. Ce fut après dans notre constitution, nous-mêmes, il y avait l'assimilation, alors qu'en termes de régularité, par quel biais a-t-on pu recevoir, échanger notre rituel d'adoption pour le rite ancien et accepté? Par quelle patente, par quelle conférence? Bon, bah oui, mais dans notre histoire et dans notre vécu, nous savons que c'est notre point faible. C'est-à-dire comment nous sommes-nous procurés les rituels du rite écossais ancien et accepté, sinon sous le coude. Nous avons beaucoup vécu sur cette ambiguïté, ça fait partie des conversations à l'époque très tendues et enfin très contestables, mais c'était un état de fait. Nous sommes passés par procuration des rituels, évidemment, par proximité, etc. Longtemps, cela nous a poursuivis. Et c'est contrariant, je l'entends bien. Et jusqu'à récemment, je vais vous dire comment tout ça s'est terminé, mais à un moment donné, les sœurs ont eu l'idée aussi qu'elles avaient une filiation de droit aussi pour le rite ancien et accepté, parce que les sœurs qui s'étaient intégrées à la Nouvelle Jérusalem en 1906, en fait, de novices, avaient déjà été initiées à la Grande Loge symbolique écossaise maintenue, et elles avaient renoncé à leur statut d'initiées au rite écossais ancien accepté pour s'assimiler à cette nouvelle loge bis de Nouvelle-Jérusalem, parce que c'était un transfert en fait que Lévi Ullmann avait opéré. Voilà. Donc longtemps nous sommes restés dans cette confusion, mais ce qui n'a pas échappé à une de nos anciennes grandes maîtresses, qui était au fait de la question, je veux parler de Marie-France Blanchet, a régularisé la situation, mais rien moins qu'en 2016, où nous avons reçu symboliquement la patente du rite écossais ancien et accepté. Donc, voilà, par souci quand même de révélation de ce qui s'est passé dans cette méprise qui s'est régularisée, on comprend très bien pourquoi, et dont notre sœur Gentilly a vraiment connu les ficelles et tout ça, donc a renversé la situation pour dire nous avons des droits au rite écossais en accepté, mais cette subtilité doit être quand même insérée dans ce passage du rite d'adoption, enfin, rite adoption si c'était un rite, sinon si c'est le rite écossais ancien accepté, ce n'est qu'un rituel. Voilà, ça il faut trancher, savoir si le rituel d'adoption est aussi un rite ou pas. Si on considère qu'il l'est, eh bien, donc elle n'est pas du rite écossais ancien et accepté. Tout ça est subtil, mais c'est 2016 qui a effectivement légalisé cette transmission. Voilà, j'allais dire j'ai dit.
Oui, si je peux non pas répondre à notre sœur, puisque ce qu'elle a dit par rapport à la patente du rite écossais reçue en 2016 est tout à fait vrai. Par rapport au rite d'adoption qui ne serait qu'un rituel ou etc. Bon, moi j'ai beaucoup parlé avec notre frère Jan Snuck quand il a fait le livre sur le rite d'adoption et l'initiation des femmes. Et pour lui, il n'y a aucune c'est tout à fait normal que les rituels du rite d'adoption soient considérés comme un rite. Il y avait l'ordre de l'adoption au XVIIIe siècle et c'est tout à fait normal que ça soit considéré comme un rite. Maintenant, je ne pense pas qu'il y avait de confusion entre le fait que les sœurs travaillaient à un rite qui était spécifique et qui n'était pas le rite des frères. Il n'y a jamais eu de confusion. Elles ont joué du mot parce que le mot était sur leur papier, mais elles savaient très bien qu'elles ne pratiquaient pas le même rite que les frères. Et bon, le passage s'est fait en 1958, forcément sous le coude, mais énormément de droits des femmes sont acquis par une belle transgression. Voilà. Donc, on peut dire que c'est comme ça. Moi, j'ai dit qu'elles avaient joué de l'ambiguïté d'un certain nombre de choses. Je n'ai pas voulu aller dans une polémique. J'ai dit.
Merci beaucoup. Merci. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Our next presenter is a great colleague, Sylvia Hottinger, from the Universidad Carlos III in Madrid. Sylvia is a translator, researcher on the history of Freemasonry in Spain, also gender and Freemasonry in Spain, and has contributed, is one of in the editorial board of REMLAC, the premier Latin American journal on the history of Latin American Freemasonry. And also she's member of the CEME, the famous Center for the Story of Freemasonry in Spain, founded that our great colleague José Antonio Ferrer Benimeli. And today Sylvia is going to talk about Belen de Sarraga from 1879 to 1950, who was a very interesting character. So Sylvia, thank you. And if you can please put her PowerPoint. Let me.
And where do I point? Here or there? Good morning. Is it working? Is it on?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm going to speak to you only a very small fragment of Belen de Sarraga's life because it's too long. And also, it's a work in progress. We're still researching it. You don't hear? Vous m'entendez pas, madame? Ah, les écouteurs. Bon.
Je continue. So this this Freemason, because she was a Freemason, is a very controversial character because she was studied, resurrected in the 90s in Spain, but only during her Spanish period. So I went through the Spanish period, which is very interesting. And suddenly I said, okay, well, now what happened? She dies and she retires. Oh, no, she went to Latin America. And I said, oh, and what happened in Latin America? Oh, she was really wild. She gave all these feminist speeches and everybody hated her and she died in shame. And I thought, okay, so until 1905, she was an organized feminist, Republican, free thinker, Freemason. And suddenly she goes wild in Latin America. She's gone crazy. What's happened here? So I started researching slowly, very slowly. And what I found was that this is an example of how not to use a PowerPoint. Okay. I've charged up with facts. For me, these are my notes in reality, but I want you to see the photographs. Okay, so the woman in the middle is Belen de Sarraga. This is her official ladylike period in Barcelona, where she was part of what was known as the Ladies of Gracia. And these were feminist Freemasons, writers, intellectuals, etc. And they are being studied at present. So the latest one that's being most studied now is Consuelo Alvarez, whose Masonic name was, symbolic name was Violeta. And who else? And a friend of mine's writing on Ángeles López de Ayala. She finished her thesis. She's converting it into a book now. So this is actually what we're studying in Spain. So what happened was I found out that, oh yeah, sorry, this is her, Belen's Masonic belonging, shall we say. Okay, her documented Freemasonry. So she belonged to the Lodge. She was initiated in 1896. She always went to conferences representing the Lodge of Virtual of Malaga. This was when she was in Andalusia. And then she belonged to the Association of Women Free Thinkers, Women of Gracia. And they worked in the same venue and with the men of the Lodge Constancia. Some consider a mixed lodge at that time, and others don't. But there it is. And then she was, there were already mixed lodges like Constante Alona in Valencia. And then she belonged to the Droit Humain Lodge in 1917 in Argentina. So that is the 100% recorded what we have documented so far about her Masonic route. Let's see, let me go. So what we found out was that she went to Uruguay in 1907 to work for the president of Uruguay, who was called José Beatriz y Ordóñez, and he was had a liberal government. He was the first liberal government, free-thinking government of Latin America. And he created all sorts of what we would call social policies. He defended non-denomination schools, the rights of illegitimate children, liberal associations of ladies, and also the working conditions for women and for children. I forgot to put women there, and he also promoted 1 day of rest for every 4-day worked, and this was totally revolutionary at the time, as you will see. So she created a newspaper there and worked on promoting his policies via lectures, via education, and via of course, writing articles for this newspaper. And when she wasn't doing that, she was traveling to other Latin American countries. So what happened was she went to the first International Conference of Free Thinkers in Buenos Aires, where together with other Spanish Republicans, but these were federal Republicans, they worked out a plan to create a united Latin America, ridding itself of ignorance, poverty, through education, social rights, and mutually supporting others' revolutions. They also, of course, they were against the monarchy, and when I write the church, it's the Catholic Church. They wanted to create Latin America a new land of promise where united countries could offer education, freedom of religion, equality, all through workers' and peasants' revolution and supporting each other's revolution. It could have been called, at one stage it was called Panamericanismo, but we can't call it that now because now it's become something else. Okay, so I'm only going to talk about, I've traced several trips of her trips, and what I did is, now I'm only going to speak about Cuba, this trip to Cuba. So, this was the situation of Cuba. It was a really tense situation because Cuba had just been through 2 wars of independence, one against Spain and one against America. And it had 2 very strong working population. One were the Spanish workers, and mostly anarchists, who immigrated to Cuba to work because there was no work in Spain. And there were the former slaves of Cuba that were also workers. And this is a quote from Rebecca J. Scott, who is a specialist in slavery in the Caribbean. And she says, when we workers build solidarity on their shared experiences, while drawing upon their material resources of family, small holdings, and the skills of kind and allies who worked in town, a truly cross-racial public life became possible if the state did not close down that public space, sorry. So she went to Cuba, invited by the Grand Lodge of Cuba, gave lectures in La Habana. Now, everything I say sounds as if she was on her own, but she wasn't. She had the support of the freethinkers, she had the support of the anarchists, and she had the support of Freemasons, because they're the ones that put the infrastructure there for her to behave. So what happened was she did her routine in La Habana, and she went to visit her friend Emilia Rodriguez, who was an Andalusian shoemaker, and she was the wife. She herself and her husband had already been active in Andalusia in Spain, and that's where Belen de Sarraga met her. And they were supposed to have the first international workers' conference in Las Cruces, which was a very heavily populated working area. But what happened was that the Cuban government expelled all the men. So Belen de Sarraga encouraged or gave her friend the idea for the women to organize this Congress, which they did. And it was a success, and one of the main speakers, and it took me a long time to find this, was Gregorio Campos, a former slave and trade unionist. So here we have a link of these 2 populations together. But what happened was there was a group of veteran soldiers who, through association, started to unite, and they created the Independent Party of Color. As you see here, there's a photograph of them. And what happened was that in Cuba in those days, it was forbidden for the colored people, so-called colored people, to create their own political party. They could join an existing political party, but they couldn't create their own. So what happened was that if you'll excuse me, but the pressure was that America was putting pressure on Cuba. They were saying, okay, first you have the anarchists, and now you have the Independent Party of Color, and the same is going to happen in the States, and these people are going to want the former slaves are going to want their land back, and the anarchists want to make us earn less money with their workers' rights, etc. So what happened was that the Cuban government accused, I better go back here, yeah. The Cuban government accused them of, the Cuban government and all the press of the world accused them of massacring and attacking white people, which was not true. And so the Cuban government sent the soldiers to kill them. But it was a very harsh situation because the people that were killing them were people they had fought with in the 2 prior wars of independence. The friend of mine who told me this, Professor Moreillon from the University of Pompeo Fabra. Now she's in Australia, New Zealand. She said that ever since the black Cubans never dared lift their head after this massacre. And it's called La Guerrita del Doce. La Guerrita del Doce means the small war, and 12 because of the year, of course. Okay, so this is the name of the work of the leaders. One was a military man and the other was a lawyer, Evaristo Estenos and Pedro Ibonet. And here, this is just what I've said, so skip this. And then, and this is a portrait of Scott got from 2013. Said, what the army portrayed as a cleaning out of criminals and anti-patriots, the population in portions of Oriente experienced a reign of terror. By all accounts, the killing by the army and by the volunteers were widespread and included non-combatants. Army officers reported killing hundreds of rebels. Chilling stories circulated of women and children machine gunned by the army and of men decapitated simply on a suspicion of sympathy for the independent party of color. The town of Cruces was said to be a stronghold of support, including women's auxiliary to the party. We can imagine who these women were. Okay. Now, to conclude, I'd like to explain that something that seems, but just because of the times, that has been forgotten, is that many people could not read or write. And the main weapon or the main means of communication was through the press. Each party, each group had its press. And what they had in Cuba was the reader. In Cuba and many of the Latin American factories, there's one that's even a woman in which country? In Puerto Rico. The first feminist was also a reader. But I only have a picture of a man, sorry. And so this, as you see, it's a man reading the newspaper in the factory. They were called readers. And the reader was paid by the factory workers. So they read novels, Stendhal, Victor Hugo, etc., and the press. It was not always the same press because they didn't all have the same ideology. But the main press there was an anarchist newspaper called Tierra. Okay, anarchy at the time was united with what we know as socialist. And it was this period when they start being divided. So my conclusion, this is just one trip. I've studied 3 or 4 trips, but I didn't want to hassle everybody with this. So she had the same modus operandi every trip she did, okay? She had articles published before her arrival. She gave speeches using local examples and dressed very theatrically for her performances. She also befriended local women within the workers' movement, supported them and got them to promote women's education. She promoted the creations of cultural centers, pretty much like the schools she first created with other teachers in Spain, working for women and girls. She also created they were called groups of resistance, workers groups of resistance, which later became trade unions. But it was not the socialists who started it. It was the anarchists, the Republicans, and many, many Freemasons. Okay. So her speeches were effective because they confirmed new ideologies coming from abroad and in person. They reassured women who were newly exposed to feminism. They identified common enemies, namely the monarchy, the Catholic Church, and colonial empires that were against science, rationalism, and workers' educations and rights. You have to remember that the Catholic Church was against all form of science. And they were always censoring, and this is where Belen de Sarraga got involved when she was a student in Barcelona. They were always censoring and expelling her professors of science while she was studying medicine. I don't know if she ever finished her degree or not, but she was a student of Pi Margal, Odon del Buen, etc. Is that I have a Catalan here. And also she was a novelty because it was a big scandal for women to fill theaters and halls and to pronounce speeches against the establishment. However, Sarraga was part of a network of Freemasons, freethinkers, and anarchists in anarcho-syndicalism since. When you study anarchy, you'll see that there are all sorts of different branches. And this is the anarcho-syndicalism because she was a pacifist. She wasn't a violent person. In the sense, many labor leaders were considered were or considered themselves anarchists, and as such, she is described firstly by Gerald Brennan in The Spanish Labyrinth. Okay, The Spanish Labyrinth is the book that explains the beginning of the Spanish Civil War. Explains how Spain came to us. It's a classic. I don't know if it's up to date or still used, but I used it. Then, okay, another thing. Although these groups pertaining to a single network were different and would become radically divided at a later date, they shared a huge ideological commonality, which was free thinking, workers' rights, and feminism. In free thinking, I include the Freemasons, okay? Because lots of people were free thinkers, but they were not all Masons, but all Masons were free thinkers, so we don't know how to. And then, and then the problem we have with this name of what to call this network is we found it in Puerto Rico as the International Free Thought Federation in America. In Uruguay, it was called the Pan American Women's Movement, founded in 1910, when we know there was a prior meeting in 1906. So we're still looking around for the name. It's a work in progress. But if these Pan American international federations were part of what have been founded in 1906, we know that it was the foundation of what was later to become the Latin American socialist dreams. Now, I want to make a very important point. This is not a conspiracy, okay? This has not come directly from Belen de Sarraga to Che Guevara, huh? No. This is just an ideological foundation of uniting through Federacy Latin America, which eventually permeated into other things, okay? Because Che Guevara, he nearly has an altar to Stalin, huh? When we're talking about the Che, we're talking about pure Stalinism, and this is not these people, okay? I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you very much.
We're going to entertain questions at the end for a discussion, and we're going to continue with the last presentation, which is by yours truly. My name is Guillermo de los Reyes. I'm professor at the University of Houston, and my colleague here, and also board member of the Policy Studies Organization. And my co-presenter here is my colleague and mentor, Dr. Paul Rich, president of the Policy Studies Organization. And today we are going to talk about, the title of our talk today is Masonic Discrimination Against Ethnic, Gender, and Religious Groups, Fraternity Without Brotherhood. And we're going to focus today particularly on the African American situation in the United States. However, as we saw previously in our panel, that Françoise talked about the history of female Freemasonry in France, the rituals and so on and so forth, something that is not really new, that some people think that is new. And Sylvia presented a very interesting character who was a free thinker and actually was part of this movement, and that was very important in Cuba, Uruguay, and Puerto Rico. And also Sylvia mentioned something that is a good introduction to our discussion today that has to do with the race situation, with the issue of exclusion, and is the Afro-descendants in the so-called New World. The segregated nature of American Freemasonry raises questions about how, through many years, the lodges have failed to be inclusive. It is very appropriate to share this panel with the scholars of minority movements, as our previous presenters, which have had more than their share of discrimination to face and which still face formidable obstacles. Sexual and racial prejudice have not by any means been vanished from fraternalism, and by knowing their history, we can perhaps contribute to how the situation has or can progress. We also need to remember that this is the 21st century. We cannot ignore issues of discrimination with the justification that tradition needs to be preserved. No tradition should be above social justice. Pessimistically, a case can be made that American Freemasonry perhaps remains one of the most prejudiced of any large American associations in the 21st century. Despite flowery language about brotherhood, fraternalism, it is open to charges of bigotry in important instances. Currently, 6 American states still refuse to recognize the Prince Hall affiliation of African American Grand Lodges. The claims made in recent decades about resolving the dilemma presented by racial discrimination have centered on the recognition of African American Grand Lodges named after Prince Hall, who along with other free men of color were initiated by a British regiment lodge in Boston in 1775. We propose that serious thought is needed as to whether, by recognizing in some instances the Prince Hall lodges, that segregation in American Freemasonry be eliminated. To the contrary, we hold that the supposed resolution of segregation by recognizing only Prince Hall affiliates, Grand Lodges, is gesture that shows lack of understanding of the African American scene. The tools of examining this area, these are a good illustration of how in the years that we have been holding these conferences on fraternalism and on Freemasonry, research has taken us down to paths in ways we could not have anticipated. This paper is an example of how re-examination, including the availability of documents either online or in other forms, has seriously changed our perception of fraternalism because of the access. However, sometimes some of the archives, either online or physical archives, are not available. So we propose that we need to continue to open and give access to those archives, but also we need to consider those online archives, and also we are great promoters of digital humanities that contribute to the development of research in the service of our scholarship, in this case, Freemasonry. For the purpose of this presentation, we will highlight the contribution made by 3 scholars in particular. Alton Roundtree, whose passionate collecting of documents relating to the Prince Hall and segregation issues is an extraordinary researcher and very much deserves to be more widely known. His willingness to include hitherto unavailable documents is extraordinary. Dr. Brent Morrison and Dr. Paul Rich have opened doors on the topics we are discussing today. In some, as their scholarship shows, history does change with time. That's something positive. Prince Hall, for whom many African American Grand Lodges are named, is one of the most important individuals to come out of the formative days of American Freemasonry. His history is well known. He was initiated in March 6, 1775, with 14 other African American by Sergeant John Batt of Irish Lodge number 441 of the 38th Regiment of Foot, then stationed in Boston. Initially granted a permit to march on the St. John's Day and to bury their dead brother Hall, applied to one of the 2 most significant Grand Lodges then functioning in England, the so-called Moderns, for charter that was granted in 1784 and finally delivered in 1787. Thus was born African Lodge number 459 on the rolls of the Modern Grand Lodge of England, which eventually transformed itself into African Grand Lodge number 1, from which Prince Hall Masons in various varieties today descend. We conclude that the press in the late 1790s treated Prince Hall and African Lodge in about the same fashion as it did other Masonic lodges. One cannot say the same for all Masonic commentators during the ensuing 2 centuries. A good example is Charles Mitchell. Mitchell's often reprinted the early introduction of bogus Freemasonry in the United States and Texas among colored Masons. Roundtree has examined many of the historians of American Freemasonry and shown how erroneous and perhaps duplicitous they have been in their treatment of Prince Hall lodges. Brent Morris remarks, and I quote, "Alton is a dogged researcher. His work on the National Compact, Grand Lodge, PHO is pretty amazing. He's overturned years of anti-PHO propaganda with a simple presentation of facts," end of quote. Generations of Masonic historians spewed misinformation that helped sustain the segregation of Masonry in the American lodges. African American Freemasonry had a solid and honest a beginning as in any of America's other Masonic lodges. Unquestionably, the assertion that Prince Hall Freemasons really had no claim to having been chartered in the 18th century and no genuine genealogy linking them to a supposed first lodge of blacks in Boston was driven by prejudice rather than scholarship. While this view was repeated frequently, it was incorrect, as Roundtree has shown in his examination of many books and papers that incorrectly challenged the genealogy. If the first African American lodge in 18th century Boston had its trials and tribulations, keep in mind that this was a tumultuous period, and many of the oldest white lodges in America shared with the Prince Hall lodges in the confusion and disarray arising out of the American Revolution. By no means did the transition go smoothly. Voorhees writes, and I quote, "In truth, we have more evidence of what was going on in African lodge, that we have in the case of many of the most important of the old lodges in the colonies, several of which appear to have worked without any charter for many years," end of quote. Moreover, a generation later, the anti-Masonic era in the American political history closed many lodges, which then later were revived. So to apply to the African American lodges a test of consistency and unbroken lineage that, if used, would disallow some of the most important historic white lodges in the United States. Certainly, the situation after the American Revolution for the lodges was ambiguous at best, and the view of African American Freemasonry was confused. Albert Pike gave perhaps the most notable example of the ambiguous behavior towards black Masonry. In 1875, he wrote to the White Grand Lodge of Ohio, and I quote, "Prince Hall Lodge was as regular a lodge as any lodge created by a competent authority and had a perfect right, as the other lodges in Europe did, to establish other lodges, making itself a mother lodge," end of quote. And yet, in the same letter, he said, quote, "I took my obligations to white men, not to Negroes. When I have to accept Negroes as brothers or leave Masonry, I shall leave it," end of quote. But Pike later generously gave a copy of his Scottish Rite Rituals to Thornton A. Jackson, Prince Hall Grand Commander, sometimes after 1887, when Jackson assumed office, and before 1891, when Pike died. So to continue with this interesting story,
in my opinion, the largest
segregated organization remaining in the United States are the Freemasons. And I can easily show that. They also are guilty of anti-Semitism and, of course, discrimination against women. And I say that with some shame as a member of America's oldest lodge, St. John's Lodge. The southern states have continued to assert that Prince Hall had no legitimacy. Brent Morris and I took advantage of the fact that even obscure newspapers are now available online to do a survey of articles in the 18th century about African American Masonic lodges. We located 45 stories. One characteristic of it is in our Herodom article and other articles we have published and which are online. It is that these lodges were treated very normally. They were not treated as exceptions. The other is number of wonderful stories. There was a kidnapping of free black people in Boston. It was common for the slave trade to try to find African Americans even if they were free people, not slaves. This Boston kidnapping, they were taken to the Caribbean and sold into slavery, but one of them was a member of the Masonic Lodge started by Prince Hall in Boston, and he gave the hailing sign, was recognized. The merchant who saw it investigated. There was a great commotion. It inflamed the press in America, and consequently, these men were freed, and at the urging of Prince Hall, legislation was passed in Massachusetts reinforcing that this kind of kidnapping of free blacks would be dealt with severely. A second instance was in 1792. The Duke of Cumberland issued a patent to Prince Hall to be the provincial Grand Master for New England, and in addition, he was asked if he had any information about a number of the White Lodges that they hadn't heard from. And there were many evidences of this in the colonial press, but the segregated Grand Lodges in America have persisted in challenging the credibility of the Prince Hall history in defense of their segregation. And of course, this means the one Grand Lodge here in Paris, which so slavishly seeks American recognition, recognizes a number of thoroughly segregated American Grand Lodges, and that the United Grand Lodge of England recognizes these lodges which will not admit people of color. I think there has been an infiltration of some of the lodges in America of people who have lost their social position. We call them rednecks, and have now gone into the Masonic Lodge as a place where they can feel comfortable. And I could encapsulate this by a story. I was invited to a dinner in the southern state, and I was seated next to a past Grand Master. I was making pleasant small talk, but suddenly he said to me, "You know, I can't get my regular tennis court appointment on Saturdays because of those," and he used the N-word. I thought, well, he said, "You know, they've taken over the parks." And I thought, my goodness, this man is turning purple. He said, they've taken over the libraries, they've taken over the schools, but by God, they're not going to get in the Masons. Well, I thought this is interesting sociological insight into Southern Freemasonry. The evidence, therefore, for a rich life in America in the 18th century of black Freemasons is ample, and we have provided it. Now we come to the second dilemma, which is the use of PHA. PHA is Prince Hall affiliation. It means a network of lodges which in the 19th century left the National Grand Lodge, which the African Americans had organized, called the National Compact. The PHA is rather evangelical Protestant. It mentions the Trinity on occasion. It has Grand Masters who served for very long periods of time, not uncommon, 10, 20 years. And it is the minority African American lodge in places like California and Maryland, but it is the one that the Grand Lodge of England, in its wisdom, and others have chosen to embrace. This is not an indication of democracy, goodwill, benevolence, but it is, to my way of thinking, a way to get out of the charge of racism as easily as possible. For our paper today, we looked at Grand Lodges in Ohio, American state, and we found that currently there are some 70 Grand Lodges in Ohio, including the Grand Lodge of Ohio, which is a regular one, so-called, and the Prince Hall affiliate. Now, some people have surveyed the bumper stickers of American Masons. American Masons, unlike European Masons, plaster their cars with Masonic symbols. This particular one, which I got from a friend who belongs, it says Prince Hall Origin, PHO. PHO has 25 state Grand Lodges, and it says on it, National Compact. That was the national Grand Lodge of the Prince Hall Masons in the 19th century, and the PHA split from it, and due to the illiteracy of the Grand Lodge of England and other jurisdictions, they have just gone out and embraced the Prince Hall affiliation without any knowledge of all of these other groups, where they came from, how they originated, what their legitimacy is. And it's supposed to be that by recognizing Prince Hall affiliation, they have solved the problem. They have not solved the problem at all. The next problem which arises is the status of you if you are an African American in Georgia or West Virginia or one of these states which do not want people of color. Your situation is you cannot take the first 3 degrees in what is called the regular Grand Lodge because it won't admit people of color. Therefore, you cannot become a member of the Scottish Rite. You cannot become a member of the Royal Arch Chapter or the Cryptic Rite or the Templar, or for that matter, the Shrine, the Grotto, and these other organizations. Your son and daughter cannot become members of these youth organizations, which in some schools are important, and so on, because you can't get legitimately the first 3 degrees. Now, there is nothing but duplicity about the position of, say, the Southern jurisdiction when it says that it has admitted people of color, because there is de facto segregation, which is cleverly done by saying, well, it's a shame you live in West Virginia and you can't take the first 3 degrees. We'd love to have you in our valley. It's ridiculous. This is a short, succinct summary of these major problems. as Guillermo said, it is now 2019. You and I could discuss gradualism or possibilities, but the evidence is that most people of morality have moved to an inclusive position about women, people of the Jewish faith, people of color. We realize that great injustice was done. We seek to remedy it. Consider then Masonry as it explains itself to a candidate and what it really is. If I tried to sell you a refrigerator and I neglected to say that it works in Virginia, but it never works in New York, you would have thoughts about that purchase. We do not explain to candidates that they will have difficulty participating in some of these jurisdictions because of their color, their religion, or their race. And I have been present at some meetings when people who have been injured by this have come and told their stories. Last year, a naval commander who was in charge of Navy education on the East Coast of the U.S. was speaking at Loge. And he was visiting a southern state, and he thought he would go. He'd seen the temple. He went to the temple on the night advertised, signed the visitor's book. He got there very early because he wanted to be on time, sat down, and no one came into the lodge room. He sat there in silence. Incidentally, he told this story in front of the Grand Lodge of the District of Columbia, so there were a number of witnesses. And he said, he sat there, and finally a man came up to him and whispered, he said, Commander, we can't open the lodge while you're here. And of course, he, being a colored man, he had suffered injustices at times, but he didn't expect to encounter it in his lodge. The recognition of these states, like West Virginia or Georgia or whatever, by any Masonic body is to recognize racial segregation. The recognition by the particular lodge here in Paris, which recognizes these lodges, is recognition of racial segregation. It's adding an imprimatur to this process. The recognition by the Scottish Rite bodies of jurisdictions where people of color are not welcome is recognition of segregation in Scottish Rite Masonry. And this topic has been avoided for years. It has a name. It has a name. It's called hypocrisy. It's called hypocrisy. And all of us are involved in it because we continue to countenance this. The most hypocritical body is the Grand Lodge of England. I enjoyed Andrew Prescott's remarks about this because its history is a version to serve its ends, not history. And the idea of really creating stories about Prince Hall which are untrue and continuing that in this century when the newspaper records that Brent and I have published show that he was a provincial Grand Master. He was a brilliant man, no question about it. And the only reason they organized African American lodges was they could not get in to white lodges. And they said that. They tried repeatedly, and they were not allowed to join white lodges. And so they organized these various branches. The history of all these branches is very complicated. And I repeat again, in some states, the Prince Hall affiliation is very secondary to the Prince Hall origin. The Prince Hall affiliation has found it suits it to cooperate with the Grand Lodge of England and other Grand Lodges for its own purposes, but it is only one of a multiplicity of Masonic groups in the United States, some of which take women, some of which exclude rituals which exclude people of Jewish faith. It's very complicated, and it is so surprising how all of this has been going on in ignorance, and people have been under the illusion that the Americans are getting this in order and settling it. Not settled at all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. Now we open the floor for questions for our panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Thanks very much to Sylvia and Guillermo and Paul. I like very much this kind of discussions to here in the history of these pathologies, no, or of Masonry. I wanted to ask you, Mr. Rich, if Obama is Mason and Michelle Obama as well.
No.
He isn't then. Okay, I thought yes. Okay, then I wanted to add that there is as well another kind of discrimination, I guess, is against and they exclude in many lodges ill people that they have illnesses or they are physical handicap, for example, blind people. I know a very intellectual person that he has been for 20 years director of a national library like this library in one Latin American country, and he has a lot of problems for go into for be accepted in lodges, in regular lodges, and they excluded. They say no because he was blind, but he was a professional. He was university, and he was director of national libraries in Latin America, and he was excluded because of that. And in the questionnaire of initiation of a Mason, they ask you if you are having a kind of illness or disability or this kind of thing. And I guess this is as well a problem, not mental illness perhaps, but physical illness, and blind people, they have as well right to be in a lodge. Okay. Only I want to ask if you believe is this a problem as well? Another kind of discrimination.
There was up until after World War II a landmark that a person must be physically whole, which was explained by the fact that the operative Masons required a person to be physically whole to work on a building. That has jurisdiction by jurisdiction faded. One of the reasons it has faded has been war veterans. A young man would come back from the war having lost a limb and would not be able to take the degrees. So there has been initiation now in many jurisdictions of blind people and of people who have been injured or lost a limb or something of that sort. However, there are so many jurisdictions that I cannot state unequivocally that that has changed universally. But certainly it became a major discussion precipitated by the war, people who were blinded, people who lost limbs, and there are lots of instances where a lodge insisted on initiating a candidate, despite the allegation that being of whole body was a landmark. That's as far as I can go in an answer to you.
It just is a very interesting question. In the case of Latin America, is not necessarily is because the problem is a cultural problem. Many countries, with some exceptions, with very few, they have not realized that we are all temporary able bodies in general. I mean, some of the logic is the problem, for example, in the case of Mexico or Guatemala or Honduras, is that the whole country has that problem with people with disabilities. But it's something that we need to consider, and thank you. Yes, yeah. No, physical disabilities.
It's a question for Sylvia. The account of the Independent Party of Colour is fascinating, and that's really interesting. So I suppose my first question about them is, what evidence have you found about their Freemasonry, and was there any Freemasonry amongst the Independent Party of Colour?
We don't know yet.
Yeah.
We don't know yet. We're still looking into it. In fact, the Cuban government's still looking into everything. They still don't know the count. They still haven't done the count of death.
So then my second question was, how far I mean, obviously Belen de Sarraga kind of became very notorious in Cuba, but the fact that they were trying to suppress undertaking this war against the Independent Party of Colour, did that place her in physical danger as well? Did she suffer physical attacks while she was in Cuba?
No. No. She had left. She had left before it happened.
Yeah.
But she did encounter physical attacks in Spain.
Right.
And that's why there are several reasons for that are thought of why she left, and that's one of them.
The other final question I can't resist asking is, how did she die? You said that she died
Oh.
badly.
It's a great story. She died in Mexico. She was exiled there, and I have photographs of her sitting in a classroom with 5 other women in a feminist meeting. Yes, but it was the 50s. It was the Cold War. Don't forget the Cold War. And no, but she was in Mexico, and yeah, and so she was. During the Cold War, forget feminism, right? And she died in. She died in Mexico. She was working in a shop, selling things, in a clothes shop, I think it was. And they rediscovered her body in 2000. It was a Chilean historian who discovered her body and found a tomb in Mexico. Sorry? Yeah. And she belonged to I don't know, it wasn't the lodge, but it was a Freemason center called the Ateneo P. Margal in Mexico. And I'm told it's the present Ateneo of Mexico. And so she died with Masonic rites. They gave her the Masonic rites and ceremony, I guess we should say. Yeah.
So I have a question about, was she part of the, was there a link between her and the anti-colonial movement, or?
Yes, in Spain.
Yes.
Yes, of course. That's another reason why. That was one of the reasons she got imprisoned. She was protesting against the killing of one of Puerto Rico's military who had rebelled against the Spanish, and that's why one of her many imprisonments was because of that.
And did she continue it in Latin America?
Of
as well?
course,
Yeah,
of
okay.
course, yeah. Because you see, I didn't say everything because it's a bit too complicated. She was brought up in Puerto Rico, and her grandfather was an institucionalista. He was one of the people that belonged to the Instituto Libre de Enseñanza, and he was a very it was a very strong liberal. I don't know how to say. I can't say liberal now. I don't know the terms in English. Okay.
Yeah.
He was an instituteur. Okay. And so when she came back to Spain, it was to study medicine. She was already a teacher. And that's why she was able to work so much in education. But she also wrote the first medical papers in Spain.
And then I have a question for the second panel. Do you think, I know that the KKK has infiltrated many other institutions in America, often seeking out positions in which people make social connections. Do you think in Freemasonry has the same thing happened, especially in the southern states that are so opposed to desegregation?
Well, there have been several good books about the KKK and the Masons, and I'd be glad to steer you to them. I don't think currently it has infiltrated, but I think that equality spreads, as my dinner companion complained about his tennis appointments being conscripted by colored people, there has been a retreat from a lot of civic activity, and there is a possibility that this kind of person finds in some lodges a home.
Thank you. Thank you to all. Very interesting. And it will be more a question for Paul. I understand that one of the part of the problem of working against discrimination in the U.S. Freemasonry is that there is so many different lodges. And is there a tendency to go to have something like more a federal approach that could help to work with all these problems like we have in the federal and the state?
There are some national organizations that maintain segregation. One of them is the George Washington Memorial in Alexandria, Virginia, which purports to be the National Museum of Masonry, but has no black people on its board, no Prince Hall representation, and it does not tell the story of women or of blacks. Should they integrate their governing structure, that would apply pressure. A second group is the Shrine, people with red fezzes, and should they make demands? So there are national organizations which remain somewhat segregated that could precipitate more change. But I do not think some of those states will ever accept colored people.
I have a question concerning segregation during Second World War among American forces. Can you say something about that?
Well, President Truman had been Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Missouri. And he, of course, after Roosevelt's death, was in charge of the armed forces. He was a proponent of integration. In general, American Army and Navy forces were segregated during the war. Some were integrated, but they were segregated. And it was only after World War II that the armed forces became integrated. And a big driving force was Brother Harry Truman. He was very adamant about it.
And I just wanted to add something related to the previous question, that I think when Andrew, in his brilliant keynote, mentioned that many of the Masonic practices have been attached to this nationalistic, the reflection of the nation that they belong to. The same has happened with the United States. We know the history of segregation in the United States. So many of the Masonic lodges continue that tradition that has been not questioned, and that's the reason why, some of the lodges and grand lodges would think about as Pierre Molière said yesterday, the universal or the transnational or the international tradition, for lack of a better word, the practices of Freemasonry, how international is this organization. Maybe some of these problems can be solved, or maybe I'm always an optimistic, but I will be a pessimistic. But at least we will start to talk about this situation, not ignore it, as it has been done, at least in the case of the United States, in terms of gender, race, and something that I thank Virginia for mentioning, the issue of disability, particularly in countries in Latin America. So
it's very painful for many senior American Masons, and I realize their pain. They have devoted their lives, and the conflict really gives them a great deal of anguish. They have my sympathy, but not my approval.
Okay, thank you very much to everybody for your comments. And we invite you to go to get some coffee and refreshments, and then we continue at 11:20. Thank you.